Hello, today we are talking about Rome, the Roman Republic. Now, at its height, the Roman Empire stretched from Northumberland in England to Algeria in northern Africa, from Portugal in Western Europe all the way to Syria in the Middle East. It stretched from the Rhine River to the Nile River, and it comprised the whole or part of the territory of what are now 30 sovereign states. It was not until 1870 that Italy, for example, achieved again the unity which Rome had imposed before the birth of Christ on the Italian peninsula. The memory of that lost unity of Rome, the Roman Republic, which grew into the Roman Empire, has haunted the mind of Europe. The idea of Rome never lost its fascination. Charlemagne went to the inconvenient Italian city to be crowned emperor in 800 Common Era CE. And the struggle for and against a Roman Empire with universal claims dominated the histories of Italy and Germany for hundreds of years. The Holy Roman Empire, which Voltaire, the famous Frenchman in the 18th century, quipped was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Well, whatever it was, it lasted from the 10th to the 19th century until it was defeated by Napoleon. And although that polity bore little resemblance to the Roman Empire we're going to be talking about in the next lecture, it did not cease to invoke the memory of the long-lived empire of the ancient world. Napoleon revived the idea of Rome again. Mussolini claimed to have restored the fasces, from whence the term fascists, which all of us recognize now as a bad and negative association, comes, and he attempted to reconstitute an empire for Rome. The founders of new constitutions being written very much across the 19th century. The US wrote its in the late 18th century. The founders of new constitutions often took Roman models. There are senates in France, Ireland, Italy, and the United States. And the Roman Church, of course, reenacted the claims of that Roman Empire on a very different plane, which we'll talk about in the next unit of our course. So what was so great about Rome? It extended to quite a bit of territory. Ultimately, this is Rome at its greatest extent around in the early 100s AD or CE. But it wasn't just a matter of its territory. The Romans built an infrastructure of roads that the remnants of which the network they laid still exists. It's needed lots of maintenance, but has remained remarkably functional throughout centuries. So the Romans were famous for the roads they built to move armies, but had a lot of other tangential benefits in that they facilitated trade and travel for normal people, not just soldiers. If you fly over the United States or Europe these days, you might see a pattern somewhat like this. And this is derived from a Roman method of surveying land called centuriation. So it's one visual remnant of Rome, a visual legacy. Rome also built aqueducts that spread across its empires, bringing water to people. So the legacies of Rome are legion. Roads, aqueducts, law, education. It built great public spaces and monuments. The remnants of several still survive, most famous being the Colosseum in Rome. I will post the link, and I want you all to watch this 3-minute clip of a Monty Python theme, the scene, if you haven't seen it already, where they say, "What have the Romans ever done for us?" it's satire. It is a scene of committed revolutionaries dedicated to overthrowing the Roman Empire. And as they sit around the table, they recognize, what has the Romans ever done for us? And you hear their answers: aqueducts, sanitation, roads, irrigation, medicine, education, wine, public baths, public safety, order, and peace. But besides that, what have the Romans ever done for us? So watch that link. It's hilarious. Beyond that hilarity, there's a lot of things that we want to think about and talk about when we study the history of Rome. So in addition to these legacies of infrastructure, its empire, Rome gives us an awful lot to think about. Certainly, we see a broad spectrum in the Roman tradition of human behavior, from this man, the very austere Cato, who ate simple meals and abhorred luxury and had very conservative values, didn't like change, to people like this Emperor Nero. This is a 19th century paper, this is a 19th century painting that captures the flamboyance, the extravagance, the luxury that was associated with Nero's court in the early Roman Empire. And this is a tragic scene capturing, it's called Nero's Torches, capturing preparation to burn alive Christians that Nero alleged had started the Great Fire of Rome. Those are just two characters in this history of Rome. Now, in this lecture, what I want to do is I want to talk about the emergence of the Roman Republic, what it was, and say a little bit about the Punic Wars, a very important military episode with important consequences for how Rome ran itself. So this map is getting ahead of us, but this is a little list of themes that I want us to think about when we think about Roman history: the legacies of empire, mass mobilization. What is the best, what was the relationship between class and politics, and what lessons or insights might this lend us about desirable relationships between class and politics? What's the relationship between wars and governance? Can you be a representative republic and be an expanding empire at the same time? How can that work indefinitely, or is there something that keeps it from working? And can a republic work amidst massive wealth stratification? These are all questions that the history of Rome prompts us to ask, because the short version is this: Rome, when it comes onto our radar screen in the 8th century, emerges as a kingship that through political struggle turns into a republic, and it lasts as a republic for centuries before that republic ceases to work. And again, in prolonged episodes, that republic devolves into even civil war before what emerges on the other side retains the names and trappings of republican government, but is in fact an empire ruled by someone more along the lines of an autocrat. With that big sweeping outline, let's begin talking a little bit about the origins of Rome. Here is a periodization that briefly outlines what I just sort of indicated. Rome, like all great civilizations, has its founding myths, and the founding myth of Rome is that it was founded by Romulus, and Romulus and Remus were twin brothers, born of Aeneas, a descendant of born of a mother Rhea Silvia, who was a Vestal virgin who had been raped by Mars. She bore twins. These twins, perceived by the ruler to be a threat, were abandoned to die, and they didn't die. They were suckled by a she-wolf and grew up to reclaim their legacy. They were descendant from Aeneas, a hero of Troy who had left then and settled among the Latiums, and his descendants were destined to settle Rome. These twin brothers, Roman history is never that pat or pretty, and the founding myths are no exception. In a dispute, they fight with each other, in which Remus is killed, and Romulus goes on to found Rome. Another also troubling founding myth is that early in their history, the men of Rome go out and they kidnap, they abduct the Sabine women, and this a war ensues from this until the women eventually end it. So we have all these very troubling myths wrapped up in Rome's origins. Before the Romans established their city, the Etruscans were there, and the Romans seem to have taken quite a bit from this fascinating society that we know precious little about. They seem to have had some connections to the early religions, traditions of Asia Minor. They bequeathed to us a dental bridge, marriages from some funerary inscriptions appear to have been loving, men and women socialized together. They produced artwork, and they also bequeathed to Rome the symbol of the fasces. Now, the fasces you see in the corner there was a particular type of axe bound to, and at the center of a bundle of sticks bound together. And the fasces in early Rome symbolized the power and authority, or imperium, this concept your textbook talks about. And it also had a broader message of strength through unity. One single stick might easily be broken, but a bundle of sticks together is difficult to break. And it became a very potent symbol throughout history. We might say until the fascists adopted it and ruined or imbued the word itself with such abhorrent connotations for civilization in their genocidal programmatic program, that it's really ruined the symbol. But before that, many republics, our own, managed to incorporate it into its symbology. Let me show you here. Here is a statue of an early Roman Cincinnatus, who was famous for, when duty called, he abandoned his fields, came and ruled Rome, oversaw Rome, the Romans, through warfare. And when that episode was over, holding all the authority that he did, he ceded that authority and went back to his farm and took up his tasks as before. And he's gone down in history as this ideal Roman citizen, competent, dutiful, modest, and not greedy for power. And this is a picture of him holding the fasces. Here, from some of my other work, we see portraiture from the early modern period. This is some 17th century engravings, and we see Nicholas Witsen represented with a fasces at his base, and also in this portrait as well. If you visit Washington, D.C., you will see the symbol of the fasces built into the Lincoln Monument and built into the walls of Congress even. Here's a slightly elaborated some points in Roman history. So I briefly sketched one of the founding myths of Romulus and Remus. After they founded Rome in the mid-8th century, there's this period of kings, ruled by kings, the Roman monarchy. Even during this period, the Senate, an important representative body, emerges. At this point, it gives advice to the king. And in the wake of an Etruscan king, Tarquin, who was accused of, who raped a Roman matron, many Roman elites rose up and overthrew Tarquin and established a Roman republic. Now, this system evolves, then it gets worked out over decades. We call the struggle of orders this period in which plebeians, lower class free citizens, wrest concessions and rights from the patricians or the elites. And these concessions get codified in the first written law code, probably penned to the middle of the 5th century, which is called the 12 Tables. We'll say a little bit more about that. And so this is the early republic. The republic works out a complicated system of representational government. And I won't ask you to remember the particulars of that, except to say that if Roman culture is quite celebrated for its simplicity, simplicity in dress early on, Cato preferred simple food. The government structures that it developed were not simple, and it was a complicated system of various institutions and assemblies that shared power and had different rules for who could be in them and what the terms were, etc. Government structure wasn't the only way that society organized itself, of course, because not everyone's in the government. And I just want to put on our radar screen, we'll talk more about this in the devolution of the Republic, the patron-client system. So the patron-client system was, I don't want to give you the impression it was too formal, but it was an interlocking networks of mutual obligations between Roman patrons, socially superior, wealthier people, and clients, inferior, poorer people, and clients would look to their patrons for support in having opportunities, in having financial help and assistance or other matters, and they would reciprocate by providing support, be it in votes or a kind of personal support to their patrons. And this system, it's important to recognize, it is not based on a system of total equality, but it was a system that was in place for a long time, that captured hierarchy. And some historians think that social stability and well-being were achieved through maintaining, or Romans thought that social stability and well-being were achieved through faithfully maintaining established ties. So here I want to pause and invite us to think about general questions about the Roman world. So I've said just a few things about how the Republic evolved, that it had a complicated structure, and I want to really emphasize this tension between rights and liberty and the hierarchy. Livy, the Roman Livy, described the Republic as, quote, he said, a free society under laws whose authority exceeds that of any man. So the concept of law, and that individuals and what they can do are constrained by law, and law is the reference that we return to decide what is right and acceptable action. At the same time, this is not a society of total equality or equal opportunity before the law. The Roman Republic, the Roman Republican law recognized 6 distinct classes of people. Your textbook talks about 3: patricians, the high aristocracy that can date itself to the founding of the Republic in 509, the equestrians, lower level aristocracy, and then plebeians, every other free people. So this hierarchy that exists in this system, this legal structure, in some ways maybe helps us understand why different assemblies have different things. It's more complicated because of the hierarchy, is how I would put it to you. And so we might think about one of the things that you'll be asked or have the opportunity to write an essay or at some point is, what was the Roman Republic, and explain its decline and destruction. What happened? Why did it happen? Previewing even farther down the road, we'll ask the same about the Roman Empire. What was it? Was it destroyed? Why and how? That's a little bit of a trick wording. Transformation, not destruction, at any rate. But back to the Roman Empire, back to the Roman Republic. What role did class or these hierarchies play in ancient Roman history? And as we think about the Republic, what are advantages and what are dangers of massive political participation? How do we see these issues play out in Roman history? And I also want us to think about, what does imperial expansion, what role does imperial expansion have in Rome's history? And also, finally, you might ask yourself, what role does the concept of citizenship have in Roman history? So those are all some of the questions that I would invite you to think about. And I think it's also really interesting to think about Roman history alongside Greek history, or what regimes exist simultaneously. We talk about Greece and then we talk about Rome as if one comes after the other, but they're emerging simultaneously. The Roman monarchy is thrown over and establishes itself as a republic right around the same time as Athens' golden age, the golden age of Athenian democracy. So these histories are happening simultaneously. And bear in mind that in the 6th century in Rome, over in Athens, Solon, as he came to power in Athens, he instituted reforms that included canceling agrarian debt, and saying a citizen cannot be sold into debt slavery, when they realized that they had this situation where citizens were being disenfranchised. In Rome, they came to a different solutions. The 12 Tables enshrines rules about property and puts parameters on the conditions under which someone could be sold into slavery for his debts. So we might think about how these societies approached these problems. Indeed, people getting poorer and losing their land is going to be a significant dynamic in Roman history. So the Republic is established around Rome, and they fight wars with the Latiums, and they've overthrown the Etruscans and the Sabines, and there's many Greeks there. They defeat the Greeks, all those colonies that were along the southern tip of the Italian peninsula, but they very much appropriate Greek culture, just like the Hellenistic age. The one Roman poet, Horace, put it this way. He lived near the end of the Republic, and he wrote, "Captive Greece captured its fierce victor." That politically speaking, the Romans defeat Greece, but there was something so attractive about Greek culture that the Romans very much appropriated many aspects of Greek culture, to much to the dismay of kind of frugal Romans like Cato, but very much the way it went. Roman gods will track with the Greek pantheon of gods, just having different names in these kind of sometimes overlapping and shared mythologies. But keep in mind, this is true. This is something we saw with Hellenistic culture as well, that you have merchants that will travel in the Middle East and have a hard time getting by because they don't know the Greek language, or this simplified Greek language of coin emerges. Greek vases have been found as far as ancient Russia, Greek texts found along the Oxus River in Afghanistan. And the Hellenistic kingdom competed to have the best and the brightest Greek philosophers at their court. So Rome wasn't alone in really finding a lot to like in Greek culture. Now, so back to Rome and Roman territory. Here this is 264 BC, Rome has conquered most of the peninsula and the Italian peninsula. Now, a key idea that I want you to take up from your textbook, and so I'll reinforce it here, is that we might ask this question: why do the plebeians, the poor, lesser free people, get wrest? Why do they succeed in wresting any concessions at all from the richer aristocracy? And I think, simply put, the answer is that Rome needs their labor, it needs their military service, and that provides them with leverage to pressure for more rights and assemblies and institutions in which they can congregate and be an institution that has a say in the republic. So as Rome expands, how does it do it? Well, it incorporates elites as it goes through battle and wins battles. It also extends its citizenship. It doesn't extend it to everyone, and the concept of citizenship in Rome, it evolves over time. It changed into the Roman Empire as well. And so not everyone had it, and people had different levels of citizenship. Citizenship varied. You had full citizens that could vote and marry any freeborn person, that could practice commerce as they liked. Other citizens weren't allowed to vote or to hold public office, but they had other property and economic rights. And then a third type of citizen could vote and practice commerce, but couldn't hold office, couldn't marry a different certain women from certain classes. So there were gradations of citizenship. When Rome conquered people, it tended not to demand tribute in a monetary or tax sense, but rather soldiers to participate in its campaigns. Those soldiers, that act of participating in the army, because they needed an army that functioned well and was organized, and the army ended up being a method of more Romanization. Also, when soldiers retired, they were often resettled out in the various colonies, because when Rome conquered, it did require a portion, maybe a fifth of the Landon area as territory that Rome takes, and it would settle its soldiers back on that. So these methods, this military retirement, this drafting soldiers, the Roman army serves as a means of Romanization. I don't want to paint it too rosy of a picture, but these are some ways in which conquered people became part of the Roman enterprise. And famously, Rome did build infrastructure. It built roads, it built aqueducts to provide fresh water to communities. And so these two things alone were huge. Even if they built their roads to move armies, the benefits were tremendous. So that also made living under Roman conquest for people on the Italian peninsula not such a bad thing. And it paid dividends. So don't take my word for it. We see in the 2nd century BCE, there are inscriptions showing that you have people like the Samnites moving into Roman conquered territory, choosing to immigrate to there because of the advantages that they think that they saw. When Rome manages to unite the peninsula, and it keeps going. But I want to kind of stop here before we get into this story of expansion, and I want to talk about the Punic Wars of Russia. Pardon me, not the Punic Wars of Rome. Here's some expanded Rome, some expanded dates and things that you can look at, some more maps. So the Punic Wars, I'm not, military history isn't totally my thing, but I want to pause on these wars because I think that they send, I think there's some fascinating historical lessons to be learned in them. Now, the First Punic War is fought 261 to 241, so 3rd century. It's fought against Carthage. All of the Punic Wars are fought against Carthage. Carthage is over on the other side of the Mediterranean. So here is Rome, here's the Italian peninsula, here's Carthage. It's quickly easy to see how they're rivals for the Mediterranean. And in the first war, Sicily is what is at stake. Sicily is a huge grain growing place, and these two rivals fight for control of Sicily. Rome wins. And this is a boon in many ways to Rome because now it has access to abundant grain, and it's conquered. It can name its terms, and it's cheaper grain. There's a downside because in the face of this cheap grain, many small farmers on the outskirts of Rome and the hinterlands, they have a harder time kind of making good and staying in the black on their own farms, and they slip out of land or ownership and start selling their land to wealthier people that are able to amass that land in these big estates that get called latifundia. So we see, as a consequence of this victory, a changed social dynamic that has a lot of downsides. The Second Punic War is probably the most famous Punic War, and it's probably the most famous because of Hannibal. And Hannibal was a Carthage, a general from Carthage, brilliant, from a long line of generals. His father had been involved in the wars in Spain. And Hannibal is famous for invading Italy and doing so with elephants that he brought across the Alps. Many of those elephants died and didn't make it to the warm Italian plains, but Hannibal did. And Hannibal was a brilliant general. And during the Second Punic War, it begins, most of the theater of war is actually in the Iberian Peninsula, what's now Spain. But Hannibal brings this army to Italy, and he's brilliant. The Roman generals know it. And the strategy of the Roman general Fabius, knowing that, is, I'm not going to engage Hannibal. I'm on my home territory, but he is far from home, far from his supply lines. So eventually he is going to run out of supplies and have a real problem. This is also a time when the relative benevolence of Roman governance pays dividends, because Hannibal doesn't really find many supporters that are willing to help in the defeat of Rome on the Italian peninsula. They're pretty satisfied, and so Hannibal is really in a no man's land. This strategy was a smart, low casualty strategy. It worked, but at a very huge cost. It was tremendously unsatisfying for the public and the officials back home who wanted news of Roman action and Roman victories. And so back in the center, they started to get pretty impatient with Fabius out on the front fighting, or not really fighting, failing to engage in this war. I think this episode provides an important lesson, or gives us pause to think about how public opinion at home can be hard to escape, for better or for worse, in the execution of war. At any rate, finally, the higher ups back home in Rome say, enough of this, we need a battle. And so Hannibal is engaged at the Battle of Cannae in 2016. Rome, General Fabius, he has his own plan, he's sticking to it, and the Senate in Rome says we're going to have a joint generalship. That was a big mistake, and the General Vero attacks. It's a disaster for Rome. 50,000 Romans, Polybius puts the figure even higher at 70,000, so 50,000 or more Romans may have died in this battle, 10,000 are captured. It's a disaster. And back home, back in Rome, where they wanted such good news, Rome starts to unravel. They kill 2 Vestal virgins as a human sacrifice. This is something to point out, because human sacrifice made in the Forum was that Rome tended not to do human sacrifice, was one of the things it said made it superior to Carthage, where that Rome said did practice human sacrifice. So it's telling, again, here, kind of another lesson, the ways in which the stresses of war nudged Rome to becoming what this society explicitly abhorred in many ways. I mean, I don't want to overstate it. I mean, they do have these rules about sacrificing people, but they tended not to do it. And ultimately, what ultimately ends Hannibal isn't totally defeated, but he ends up getting called home because another Roman army defeats Carthage, and he goes there. And ultimately, Rome wins the Second Punic War, and now it is a master of the Western Mediterranean, for sure. The Third Punic War, what I would just say about that, Rome is going to win it as well. The Third Punic War, in some ways, starts pushing Rome more into its eastern expansion, and the reason why was that Carthage had an alliance with Macedonia over in northern Greece, from whence Alexander hailed. And so as a result of that alliance, Macedonia dutifully declared war, Rome set an army there, and that's when it moves toward taking Greece, and then it will continue expanding even farther eastward. Now, so those are the Punic Wars in a nutshell. Cato, who we talked about before, became famous for, in addition to his austere ways in the Roman Senate, he ended every speech by saying Carthage must be destroyed. And and it is said, one thing that is said that your textbook tells you is not true, is that when the Romans conquered Carthage, they used biological warfare, and they poured salt in the earth so to poison the soil so that nothing could grow there, in an ancient example of biological warfare. Our textbook tells us that that did not happen, but nonetheless, the destruction of Carthage was total. And if I've been making this case that Roman imperialism on the Italian peninsula was sort of benevolent, we can't say that at all about the destruction of Carthage. And some even said it was very un-Roman in its cruelty and completeness. People talk about the Punic Wars as having kind of a Punic curse, and I think two things are meant by this. One has to do with, I already talked about a little bit, with the conquest of Sicily and this access to cheap, abundant grain. It impacted the domestic economy in a way that hurts lots of small landholders. Many small farmers went under, and they ended up selling their lands somewhat in desperation to rich, who got richer, whose latifundia grew, and they established vast plantations. We'll come back to these when things really fall apart, and we end up having a manorial system develop in some way in the remnants of these huge latifundia that are building. And then two, what else is the Punic, do we mean when we say the Punic curse? In some ways, it launches more imperialism for Rome. We're going to need more militarization, more campaigning, and more conquering distant peoples. And how does that stretch a notion of citizenship? Can you have a republic and an empire? Well, they do for a couple of centuries anyway, and we will talk more about that next time. Thank you.